Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome. I'm Rob Doherty, and this is the FSTVS Podcast Executive Edition, supported by Liberi Consulting and hosted by Julian Scott, the animation consultant for Film London. In this podcast series, we'll be chatting to the movers and the shakers in the animation industry, and discovering a little bit more about what they do, how they got there, their thoughts on the animation industry, and I hope get to meet the person behind that executive title. After a little summer break to recharge the podcast batteries, we're back, and we're back with a bang. Or back with a bob if you'd rather, as today's guest is the utterly charming and rather sensational Bob Higgins. Currently the President of Trustbridge Entertainment, Bob's career has encompassed roles at Cartoon Network, WildBrain, Fremantle Media, Boat Rocker Media, among others, and shows such as Dino Ranch, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Ben 10, Camp Lazlo, Katie Mim-Mim, and so many others. He's even worked with Ricky Gervais, whoever the heck he is. This is a riotous ride through Bob's career, and listen out for Bob's advice on how to conduct oneself in an interview, and, maybe more importantly, how to follow up with references, saving the biggest and best till last. Please enjoy.
Bob, thank you so much for finding the time to chat today.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, I think we've known each other for about 25 years. I think the first time we met was on a show for PBS called Dragon Tales, way back.
Mm-hmm.
And you were back then, you were at Sony, I think.
Correct.
And since then, you've been involved in a whole host of great shows at some, really top studios and companies. You've been SVP Creative Affairs at Classic Media, SVP Programming and Original Series at Cartoon Network, Head of Creative at WildBrain, EVP Children's and Family at Fremantle, EVP Kids and Family at Boat Rocker, and now you're President of Trustbridge Entertainment.
Yes.
You've even dabbled with Ricky Gervais.
I did for a brief time. A dalliance.
Well, we'll get on to that a bit later. Now, I could list all the shows you've been involved with, but it might take a little while. Do you have any idea roughly of how many shows you've done?
I would say north of 60.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, if you kind of like break down the number of companies and then assume at least 10 per company, that's not a 70. A lot.
That's not a bad track record.
I've messed up an entire generation of people.
I don't think that's true for a second. So where did the inspiration of getting into the entertainment industry come from? Was it something from your early years, an animated show or a film that got you thinking, I'd really like to do this one day? And did cartoons play a big part in your youth?
So the first part, I was an acting kid, and all the way through, college and everything. And I knew I wanted to do something, I thought, in front of the camera. So in college, I actually studied broadcast journalism because that you could be in front of the camera and actually have a track toward a career and a job versus waiting tables.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, after I did study journalism, I decided I didn't want to do that. So I moved to LA to be an actor. And that failed miserably.
Oh.
I was one of those people that would go stand in front of the people and didn't even get to speak before they were like, no, like next. So then I just kind of stumbled into the whole concept of the television and film industry, like from a producerial or executive capacity. When I went to work at a talent agency called Creative Artists Agency as a temp. I was a mailroom temp. I'm literally the that kind of quintessential mailroom to success, story. Because I was in the mailroom and pushing my little cart around and happened to be right place, right time where somebody's assistant had quit And I was pushing my little cart by the head of HR, and she was just like, you go upstairs and, sit on this agent's desk for the afternoon. And he ended up liking me. I guess I answered his phone properly and didn't mess anything up. And so then became an assistant to him in the television packaging department. And that's where I just started learning about how television shows are really kind of put together.
So when you say packaging, what did that entail?
Packaging. So at the time, the agent with whom I worked, his name is Phil Kent, and he went on to run all of Turner at one point. He became the chairman of Turner Entertainment. But at that time, he was responsible for all what they called non-network. And non-network meant all of cable, all of syndication, all of kids, and all of, at the time, infomercials. So, one of the things I worked on with him was Cher, who was a CAA client, did some infomercial. I can't remember what it was, but she was kind of infamous at the time for having done it. And we would, take Cher, take a director, and go put it together and sell it. Or we would, he represented Nelvana, which is how I ended up learning about kids. And they would, there was a TV show called Tales from the Crypt Keeper, and Bob Zemeckis and that group were CAA clients. So he kind of took the CAA clients and the brand and married it with Nelvana, and then put it together and went to ABC Children's at the time and sold it.
So it's kind of like a matchmaking thing almost.
Yeah, it's a matchmaking. It is literally putting the package together. We were not responsible creatively, but it was kind of like, how does 1 + 1 = 5 type of thing, where the marriage of the pieces really kind of creates the success, the sale, and then you leave it up to the creative people to do the creative job.
And I'm jumping ahead slightly now, but
sure.
do you think
too? So.
No, not at all. No, but I'm just thinking, I'm jumping ahead in terms of what you do now and what you've done over, sort of your more recent career of putting different parties together. You've got an idea, and so you think, well, this would work well for this network and this studio and this network in Australia and maybe this network in the UK. Do you think some of those sort of the kernels of that way of working came from working at CAA?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a ton of things that I learned from being an assistant there. I was there for 3 years, maybe 2. I don't know, 2 to 3. And ended up working for a number of people, but watching really the strategy. And I think that's something that, sometimes gets overlooked, of really kind of, figuring out where do we want to get and what do we need to do to get there. Now you can, you could always say, well, you write the most creative script in the world and you come up with some wonderfully original concept and it will just be found. But unfortunately, that's not the case. There are a number of, TV shows and films and other creative ventures that never see the light of the day because they lack a strategic trail, or map to get there. And it is putting together, particularly, I think it's what I learned way back then, and that was the early 90s. That was a long time ago, to today, where the current streamers and platforms are looking for that hook of what's going to pull the audience in to your show, and they are often looking for those packaged in elements of a celebrity, a known IP, some sort of calling card for your program that will bring the audience, and that's packaging 101.
and stuff that you learn early in your career, as you say, has a real impact on stuff as you go through your careers. I think people call us industry veterans now. Maybe not you, but that's what
No, they just call us old.
Okay, well, let's slip back to when we were both young. You left, as you just said, you left CAA to join Nelvana as director of development. What was the lure of Nelvana?
Honestly, I was done getting coffee.
Fair enough.
I had, I'd been an assistant for 2 years, 2+ years. And I thought I wanted to do primetime, because once Phil Kent left CAA to do other things, I ended up working with other agents who worked for CBS packaging. So I, started doing primetime stuff, and that was cool and sexy. And, if you're not going to be doing feature films, you want to be doing primetime television. And, but what happened was I had created a relationship with Nelvana from being, a client of the agency, and I would see them all the time. And one day Topher Taylor, who ran Nelvana at the time, reached out to me and said, we have a manager at the time of development role opening. Are you interested? And I didn't want to necessarily do kids, but I didn't want to be an assistant. And for me, I was like, oh, I'll just do this kids thing. And that would be a stepping stone to other, things. And so I, interviewed, offered the job, took the job. And they wanted to be in primetime too, which is why he had approached me. So we actually did a couple of primetime developments that I was able to kind of take things and people that I knew from the primetime world and package them in. So we developed like a Barbarella series with ABC, and we did CBS's first ever CGI character-led, primetime series. Neither of those ever saw the light of day, but we did make pilots for them. But he said, we want you to do this primetime stuff, but that's like 10% of your job, and 90% is going to be the kids stuff. And then I ended up just really liking the kids stuff. And it, I at the time didn't have children of my own, but I had, a dozen nieces and nephews, and just seeing the things that I was doing, like Little Bear, impact them. And I got a kick out of it. And it was just fun, working on it.
And they are the most discerning audience of all time, because they, especially younger kids, I always think, don't really care who's in it. They don't care what IP it's based on. They don't care about any of those things. They start watching it, and they either like it or they don't. And if they like it, it's purely because they like the show, not for any other reason.
Correct. Yeah, they're not into the packaged elements. They certainly care about who's in it, because even if it's an animated Little Bear, that's, for them, that's the actor, that's their friend,
sure.
That's who they're getting it to see. But yeah, I agree that they don't care what happens behind the scenes or who's there or who necessarily, when often on a TV show, you'll go for a celebrity voice, and that's just for PR for the adults. The kids don't care,
no.
Who that voice is.
And you went from Nelvana to Sony, I think it was. What made Sony attractive? How did that move happen?
That was so they were just starting up what at the time was called Columbia TriStar Children's Programming, and Sander Schwartz, who I had never met, but he got my name from somebody as he was starting up. So they needed basically a head of development. So he reached out to me, and this is a funny story if I can tell it.
Of course.
So he, there was interview process. Lots of, people had gone in for it, and I was getting to the end of the process, and so I did what people will often do, and you start getting advocates to call in on your behalf. And when I was, now in my mid-20s, and most of the heads of the networks, not even most, all of the heads of the networks were, run by women and I was like just a flirty young 20-something. And so I had nice relationships with all of these people. So I had Judy Price from CBS call, Jenny Trias from ABC call, anyone I could think of to call into Sander and, say how wonderful I am. And so he calls me one day and he's like, Mr. Higgins, he's like, I get it. You're amazing. He's like, I've heard from everyone in the world except for your mother about how wonderful you are. So if you could, call off the dogs, I'd appreciate that. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I was a little over, zealous. And we hung up the phone. And then I called my mother and I said, Mom, here's a phone number. You have to call this guy right now and tell him how amazing I am. And she did. And he called me back and he gave me the job. So,
that is brilliant. I had no idea. That's so ballsy. That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, who wouldn't give somebody a job if they got their mother to call them and say, my son's amazing? If someone did that to me, I'd be too scared not to give them the job. Not saying you didn't deserve it, but that's really amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a funny story.
So did you live up to expectations at Sony? Were you amazing?
I like to think so. I think the team of us, Sandra and I have teamed up together multiple times over my career now. We did great. When I got in, he had already, teed up things like a Jumanji series. And what we had there, we had some great IP. So we had Jumanji, we had Ghostbusters, we had, soon later, Godzilla, Men in Black, things like that. And he had already begun the early building blocks of Dragon Tales. So when I walked in, there were a few things that he had at least gotten the groundwork going, and I could immediately jump in and begin, bringing in writers, bringing in developers to help make the shows. And by this point in my career, I had, gone far into the creative side. So I had the strategic thing from CAA, but now I was the guy giving all the script notes and, really, focusing on the creative part as well. And so that's what we did. And over that time, I think we did 10 to 12 series between 95 and when I left in 2001, 96 and 2001. Mm-hmm. And for both network and syndication at the time, that was kind of like when syndication was really kind of beginning to peter out, but we worked with a gentleman named Alan Bobod who had a syndication, time slot sold all around the US. And then, at that time it was great because you could finance a good chunk of your show just out of the US and the rest of the world was, kind of your profit center. Those days are long gone, but that's, that's what we did there.
It's interesting because you talk about the sort of being heavily into the creative, but also retaining that sort of sense of strategy and talking about that back in that time that you could pretty much finance a show out of the US, mm-hmm. and the rest of the world was upside, was profit. Mm-hmm. Do you find that sort of balancing the creative and the sort of the commercial is easy, or is it challenging?
it's necessary, I guess, is my answer to that. Whether it's easy or challenging, I think really depends on the individual show. Sometimes it's very easy, using the Sony examples, doing Extreme Ghostbusters, the commercial was built in, and the play patterns were built in and all the things, and the global appeal was built in. Ghosts and spooky things work everywhere. And then just kind of making sure that we creatively delivered on the comedy and the action and the character. That one's an easier setup than some other ones, that I've worked on over the years may be. But it's always, that scale of, commercial versus creative. They don't necessarily need to be at odds with each other, but you do need to kind of figure out how they both can be a necessary part of how you put together your show.
Now, I think you transitioned next from sort of the studio and production company environment over to Cartoon Network, where in addition to overseeing the development and production of notable successes like Ben 10, you also managed all the scheduling, stunting, platforming for Cartoon Network and Boomerang. To me, that sounds like a really, really big job. What do you think it takes to manage big teams like that?
So there was a half step between Sony and Cartoon. I was at the first iteration of Classic Media for 18 months. But then going over to Cartoon, and then having teams underneath it, which I did not have at Sony. I mean, I built a team and we ended up being like a team of 5, and then at Classic Media it was back to being a team of 1. And then at Cartoon, it was having, 4 different teams because of the different areas that I supervised. And honestly, the thing that I learned, and part of it was because at this point I had also become a parent, and you learn a lot becoming a parent, I think, and hopefully it rubs off in a positive way in terms of your management skills. So there are parents who, as you're teaching a child to walk, will hold the kid and almost walk for them, and those kids sometimes take a little bit longer to learn to do it versus allowing your kid to fall down as a necessary tool or step in learning to take steps of the fail thing, and learning from failure, and I think that is one thing that I allow anyone who's ever reported to me to do, is to give them the ability to take risk and the ability to fail sometimes, and learning from it, because you can also have great success with risk. You can be the fastest one to walk by, not having all these guardrails and rules and overly, attentive management style where you're basically doing the job for people. So it was really just learning to trust my teams, trust the people that you hire to do what you hire them to do. That's why they're there. You don't need to do everything for people. And I learned that pretty quickly, and it became a successful, I think, model. When I was at Cartoon, we had the highest ratings in the network's history for those, 4 years that we were there. And I mean, that remained true till today. Those years were the highest rated. And I think it was because there was a lot of experimentation and risk taking, and, just experimenting and risk taking that we did, and trying to put the best shows on, and figuring out ways to put them in the most appealing light, and stunts and things like that on the air that we would do.
And do you think some of that risk-taking and devil-may-care attitude, not devil-may-care, but sort of like pushing the boundaries, has gone a little bit these days?
Yeah, I think, particularly these days, meaning the last, 3 or 4 years, where our industry has been beaten up a bit. And what that does is create a lot of anxiety and fear. And so what you don't do when you're feeling anxiety and fear is take risks. You kind of go into your corner and you hunker down. That's just natural instinct. But I think that it has created a little less risk, and that you haven't seen those big, huge hits come out anymore. Because the big, huge hits that we've had in our industry have all been risky. Whether you're going back to, things like a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which was passed on at every single network in the United States, and Haim Saban, to his credit, he, kind of doubled down. He made the thing, and he, got Margaret Lesh to finally put it on. But, it was not without a ton of risk around it. Same thing with Pokemon. Same thing these days with Bluey. That show, had it not gone through the ABC and Libby, who let them kind of, she bought into what they wanted to do. It was quote unquote different from today, doing this kind of all family sitcom in a way, animated sitcom for this bridge audience of 6, 7, 8-year-olds that no one seems to want, which I'm weird sometimes, but we've kind of like, you have the very young and the very old. And so, she took a risk with those creators of that show, and it worked. I think the big risks are where the big hits come from. And you generally don't see those big mega hits come from safe choices.
No, totally. I completely agree. And that's a really nice segue into WildBrain, and specifically the Ricky Gervais show, which I think you EP'd for 3 seasons. So it sounds like you went from sort of, that big corporate world back down to sort of hands-on executive producing. And this was an Emmy-nominated HBO primetime animated series, which was based on podcasts that I think were created by Ricky Gervais, Stephen Merchant, and Carl Pilkington. And podcasts were not as prolific then as they are now. And I guess adapting a podcast to a series for TV was exactly that. It was revolutionary and quite risky for its time, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. So that was, I had gone from Cartoon Network to WildBrain. And this is a different WildBrain than, in a way, the WildBrain you're thinking of, because this is when WildBrain was a small San Francisco-based animation studio. And it was run by a guy named Charlie Rivkin, who now is the head of the MPAA. But at the time, he was running WildBrain, and as part of running WildBrain, he had bought a company called Kid Robot, which was this cool vinyl toy and apparel company, really kind of targeting late teens and 20-somethings, cool art, graphic art vibe. And so he brought me over from Cartoon Network for this kind of startup, and I was going to retire with riches and be sitting on an island right now. That didn't work out, because this is in 2007 7 and 8, and they were a VC funded company, and that was not a good time to be a VC funded company. But anyway, before the money dried up, we did have 2 kind of, very risky, interesting hits. So the first one, I will admit, I walked into. Charlie had negotiated it before I got there, which was, and I'll get back to Ricky Gervais, sorry, in a second, which was Yo Gabba Gabba. Again, a very risky thing. So Scott and Christian, the creators of that, had made their own pilot and put it on YouTube, and it got the attention of the industry. And Charlie saw it and, made, a go for turning it into a show. And he was friends with a woman who used to run Nick Jr. and Nickelodeon named Brown Johnson, who, everybody knows. She's an icon. And anyway, they agreed to, we both like this, let's do it together. So by the time I came into WildBrain, that was already in the works, and my job was just to not mess it up. So we kind of, we're growing WildBrain, and that brought some cool attention to us. So we ended up getting the attention of the William Morris Endeavor. This was right as they were all kind of becoming Endeavor or WME. We got the attention of them, and they wanted to represent us because an agent there named Richard Weitz was a huge Kid Robot fan, and Yo Gabba Gabba is the coolest thing ever. So again, back to that packaging stuff that I learned when I was at CAA, he started introducing me to clients that he thought fit the vibe of what we were trying to build at WildBrain, which was this kind of cool, out of the box, always surprising vibe of shows. And so the idea of working with Ricky came from him. He was his client. And my director of development at the time was actually the biggest fan. I won't take credit for it. She was the fan of the podcast, a woman named Lisa Ullman, and she introduced them to me, and we went to Richard and we're like, okay, crazy idea, but let's take these things and chop them up and animate to them, almost like little, stage plays. We just let the podcast run, and we, put the animation on it and use it to heighten the absurdity of what they were talking about. So we pitched it to Ricky, and he loved it. And then again, agency packaging, Richard took this, here's WildBrain, here's this idea, here's Ricky Gervais, package into HBO. And Ricky was in business with HBO from his comedy specials, and they gave it a straight to series pickup.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I kind of took my Cartoon Network, Rolodex of different directors and artists, and we put the package together and made the show.
This podcast is made possible thanks to the support of the awesome Liberi Consulting. Liberi offers specially tailored industry-related training courses. Check them out at libericonsulting.com. That's Liberi consulting.com. You can also find links to their fantastic courses on the Festivus website.
Were there any sort of specific challenges that you had? I know you sort of, back in the day, you in prime time, but now you're fairly well ensconced and been making a lot of kids shows. What do you think the key differences are between making kids shows and primetime shows in terms of animation?
Honestly, there's really not at the core of it. It really comes down to, great characters that you want to hang out with for a long time. And, obviously the sensibilities are very different. You know, what's funny to a 3-year-old is usually very different from what's funny to a 30-year-old.
Yeah, sure.
And so, you know, that's different, but good, solid, appealing characters that you want to hang out with for hours of your life is what both are reliant on. And that's what we had with, you know, Ricky and Stephen and Carl. And I think a lot of it was because they were friends. And you felt like part of the group. So, you know, today a 5-year-old wants to be friends with the Paw Patrol group. You know, they want to be part of it. It's the same thing. Everybody wants to belong. Everyone wants to be part of what the cool kid club. And I think that's what we had with the Ricky podcast, was this kind of funny, absurdist cool kid club. And it just kind of worked. I don't know if there's any magic formula of what exactly, you know, creates success beyond that. And that's just always hoping that the character's appeal that you think is there actually is there.
And yeah, if you say there is no magic formula for success, because if there was, we'd all be sitting on that island that you mentioned,
Exactly.
getting a few rays and, you know, sipping pina coladas. Throughout your career, and maybe it's for the exception of the Ricky Gervais series, which I think there was an Academy nomination for the episode Knob at Night. Your work's always been, I suppose, and you just mentioned this, really developmentally appropriate for a younger audience. And at one point, you were also on the advisory board for gromsocial.com, which at the time was saying they provided children with a safe, educational and fun alternative to the social media websites available a few years ago. Has, I suppose, positive storytelling, and although you mentioned about, you know, helping children find being able to walk and falling over, but has positive storytelling always been important to you individually?
I think so. I think, you know, whether it was growing up and the things that appealed to me, I've always moved toward things that that pull an emotion. Anyone who knows me and anyone who, you know, I'm connected with on social media knows I'm a crier. You know, I will watch anything, and if I get sucked in, it's like I just end up bawling. So as a viewer, I like to emotionally invest myself in things that, you know, really pull at my heartstring, and things that pull at your heartstring aren't necessarily sad. They are things that you fall in love with these characters. And typically it's because they make you feel good, so that when something, you know, befalls them and pull, all of a sudden the tear ducts start, it's because you're so invested in those characters that you allow yourself to feel for them. And so I think that's something that I try, even on, you know, things that seem as kind of flippant as like an Ed, Ed and Eddie. The friendships that are there on the screen are real, and the characters are real, and you know, you invest in them, and they are even at their most absurd, and, you know, they are always trying. And I think those character attributes of the underdog, you know, the kind of positive, Pollyanna-ish positive attitude, those types of characters are what appeal to me. and I always try to find ways to put those attributes into the series on which I've worked. And I think that's what I even forget what your question was, but that's what I try to do.
No, it was about.
I just started rambling.
It was a good ramble. Don't worry. It was interesting. But, I was just talking about sort of positive storytelling and sort of thinking about from social, trying to find an alternative to the social media that was going on at the time. And I was thinking about kids and social media now, and a lot of younger and younger kids, whether it's legal or allowed or not, are engaging with social media and getting a lot of influences and stories from social media. I don't know quite what the question I'm asking.
It depresses me, and I think
you've answered the question. I wasn't too frightened to ask.
It's part of our existence now, and I'll admit I'm a Facebook whore. I'm there a lot. Is it the healthiest thing for me? No, but it's a way to keep in contact with a lot of people around the world in the most efficient way. And even saying that out loud, it's like, well, really, is efficiency the goal of friendship? It's like, oh, good, one and done. And I hit all 500 of you at the same time. Probably not. And I do think that it is. So while it's part of our world, it's something that I think we're going to be seeing. We already are seeing in a 30-year study of the negative impact of these relationships that are not real. They're not tangible. They're not running out in the woods with your best friend. They are, playing and interacting behind a screen. I think that's you're going to see negative impact of that. I think you're going to see, and we are, a ton of body issue things where, influencers put up, pictures of themselves, which are unreal. And it's because most of the time they are. Anyone can take a picture and go in and give themselves a Barbie body or a He-Man body and put it out there, and all of a sudden the kid, and when I say kid, I'm going, anywhere from, 7 to 27, are seeing something that is unreal that they need to match. I think that's dangerous. I think the keeping up with the Joneses part of social media creates massive depression because most people's lives aren't that. And again, that's the mirror you're seeing. So I wish I had the answer. My dad, before he passed, he was not a social media person. And he would say to me, this is the worst thing that's ever been created. And sometimes I think he was right. It's like, for all the positives, the ability to connect, and people listening to this podcast can't hear my fingers doing the little,
the quotations,
the little quotation, is positive. But I honestly do think that it has created more of a disconnect than a connect for people. And I wish that there would be more time spent with physical connections in a playground, running in the woods, doing imaginary play with your friends, that people used to do that seems to be going away.
Well, I mean, let's bring things up to now. You are President of Trustbridge Media, and that's a division of Trustbridge Global Media, which I think is VC-backed. So I'm hoping it's a good time to be VC-backed as opposed to your last comment earlier on. And there's a lot of, they've acquired a lot of sort of celebrated children's book publishers. So do you think things have come a bit full circle for you now? You know, we were talking earlier on about taking risks and things coming out of taking risks. But legacy IP, such as, you know, you've just recently announced your deal with Sky Kids for Maisy. Do you think those are now realistically the best options for commissions moving forward?
Are they the best? I don't know. I'm happy that they seem to be a very popular option right now, because that's the company that I'm running and building. So I think it helps. I do love that what we're doing are book-based IP and you know, encouraging kids to pick up a book and read and engage. So that makes me happy. And one of the things that I really, when I decided to come over, was very appealing to me. And then I'm hopeful, you know, let's use Maisy as an example, that the content that we're creating, I can take all of the things, the risk stuff that we talked about earlier, and apply it to it, so that the choices that we're making will be surprising. And I think when this Maisy, my friend Maisy, does come out, the expectations of what you think the Maisy show is will be shattered, because there was a Maisy show back in the late 90s. And the stories tended to be relatively straightforward and relatively domestic in nature. And we are really allowing Maisy to do everything that she has done in the books over the last 30 plus years, which, you know, sometimes they are domestic, but sometimes she goes, you know, to the moon. And sometimes the books spend an entire episode exploring stripes and spots, and we're doing that. So sometimes Maisy, you know, will go off into this kind of almost parallel universe of stripes and spots, and it's like this little, you know, trip that we go on with her and her friends. And back to the point we're making on social media, and I wish kids were out there doing more imaginary play together and things like that. A lot of that is what this show is about. It is Maisy and Charlie and Tallulah and Eddie and Cyril all playing together. And even if that means that they are, you know, Maisy's a dentist, there's an element of play in it. And I'm hopeful that it will inspire kids to do some kind of, you know, fantasy play of I can do anything, I can be anything, I can go to the moon, I can become a butterfly, which they do in one of the episodes, and everything that entails. So yeah, I think it will, and I hope that it will really surprise. We always see those that line in any PR thing saying surprise and delight, but I think this one actually is going to surprise and delight.
I have no doubt. I'm sure it will. I mean, it's been curious as we're sort of coming to the end now. It's been very interesting listening to you talk about your career and talking about relationships and personal relationships, and the names of important people over the years just trip off your tongue. You can name absolutely every single person that, you know, has had an influence on you or you've worked with. And, you know, one of the things that Festivus does is it runs its various sort of social events in London. There was one in Annecy, I think there's one in Munich, there was one in Cardiff. For somebody who is sort of relatively new to this industry and looking to sort of move and forge ahead, how important do you think those networking opportunities are to someone starting out?
They're not even just important to someone starting out. They're important to someone who's been doing it forever. This is a an industry that is really reliant on relationships. It's a not just in the friendly way, but in the collaborating together way. Every single television show or feature or what have you, for the most part, is done by a team of 100 people. And it's everyone working together and learning to collaborate and putting all the creativity into the pot, is where, the magic typically will come from. And so I think it's essential to always be broadening your circle of relationships, and meeting new creative people and meeting new strategic people and meeting new marketing people, because all of those things are important, and then maintaining those relationships over the years. Yeah, I can honestly say I remain, friends and actual friends, not just, kind of the bullshit version of friends, with all of the people that I've worked with over the years, because they do become part of your life when you spend the hours that we spend working. We're not, in the widget factory, where, you're kind of by yourself doing your thing. We are as I said, this kind of creative community. And so I think, for anyone starting out, finding ways to meet and make an impact on someone, is an essential first step. I always tell people, we go to Kidscreen, and people will be like, I want to pitch a show. And I'll always tell them, like, we can pitch your show later. What your job here as a newbie into this industry is to meet people and make them remember you, which is a much harder thing to do than just pitching a show, which probably, in that type of chaotic Kidscreen, or MIPCOM atmosphere, they will forget. But if you can make that emotional one-on-one connection, I think that's where everything starts. And then they will be more open to looking at your stuff later, because they're like, oh my gosh, she was the funniest thing. She told this story that, I've now repeated 10 times, since then. And I think those, that's my advice to people starting out is be that person that someone says, oh my gosh, I just heard the funniest thing, Susie Smith is brilliant. I need to, work with her.
Well, listen, I don't think you really need any help with your career, but I am so repeating that story about you getting your mother to ring Sandra up and say how great you are. It's absolutely going to be my dinner party opening gambit. Listen, Bob, thank you so much for spending time talking to me today. I know you're crazy busy, but it really, really has been fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
As always, a huge thanks to Bob for taking the time to talk to us about his journey from the mailroom to the boardroom. And hopefully you've all come away knowing a little bit more about the man himself, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit more about you. I know one thing for sure. I'm getting my mum to write all my references from now on. And the show wouldn't happen at all without the wonderful work of Janet Balmforth at Liberi Consulting for her incredible organisational skills, to Julian Scott at Film London for his charm, wit and talent as our host. Find out more about Film London at filmlondon.org.uk. And the edit skills of Odelia Sikinga, who is also an awesome kids development and production executive. Find her on LinkedIn. If you'd like to sponsor this podcast, then drop me a line at aloha@festivus.net. That's aloha@fstvs.net. I look forward to hearing from you. Bye-bye now.